Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ewan Graham. I'm a partner and healthcare sector lead at Hawkins Brown Architects, and we're based here in London. It's my privilege today to act as moderator for this panel discussion as part of the London Festival of Architecture, a month-long bonanza of architecture and design focusing on this year's theme, care. Quick mention to the LFA and their sponsors for hosting this year's event and making it possible. Please do check out their website at londonfestivalofarchitecture.org. Whilst we'd really hoped to have a live audience event today, as with many things over the last 18 months, we've had to adapt and progress and do what we can to keep going. So myself and the panel here are here at the Foundling Museum. You guys are at home in your home offices, sheds, and maybe somewhere a bit more exciting. And I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about why we chose to host at the Foundling Museum. Our venue celebrates environments of care. The Foundling Hospital was originally established by Thomas Coram, and it was seen as a place to provide care for babies at risk of abandonment. Coram's vision for the Foundling Hospital was to create a safe place, somewhere that was friendly, welcoming, and full of care. So to modern day, when our government are planning the next generation of hospitals, when we're beginning to put mental health on the same platform as physical health for the first time, and when our hospitality industry is beginning to get its feet back together after 18 months of being closed, we wanted to ask some big questions. Those questions are, who cares about our health? What it is that makes certain environments caring or how they feel welcoming? And what impact can architecture and design have on care? We've invited an eclectic panel to be with us this evening. And we'd asked them to share their perspectives from outside of the world of architecture and design with you, who are probably all design enthusiasts and architects. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my panel. So starting on my left-hand side, we have Tim Goodacre, who is Vice President of the Royal College of Surgeons. Tim is a reconstructive plastic surgeon from Oxford. He's one of 3 Vice Presidents of the Royal College of Surgeons of England. He enjoys the creative craft of reconstructive surgery with the life-enhancing aspects of techniques that do other than simply save life or alleviate physical pain. Next over is Dr. Rachel Clark. She's an author and palliative care doctor. Before going to medical school, Dr. Rachel Clark was a television journalist, a documentary maker. She now specialises in palliative medicine, caring deeply about helping patients live the end of their lives as fully and as richly as possible. To my right is Marion Ridley. Marion Ridley is the director of Evelina Children's Hospital in London. Marion spent her working life as a manager in the NHS, having joined graduate trainee before becoming Evelina London's first director in 2013. She's responsible for leading Evelina London overall, working closely with the executive team. Together they make sure their staff can deliver the best care to children, young people and their families. To Marion's right is Rama Gahirwa. Rama is a director at the Helen Hamlin Centre for the Design at Royal College of Art. Rama is an international and inspirational figure within the design community. He's a serial innovator in the fields of inclusive design, design thinking and creative leadership. He uses design to address society's toughest issues, from ageing to healthcare, ability and diversity. And finally, but by no means least, Hilary Evans on the far right, Chief Executive of Alzheimer's Research UK. Hilary looks after the UK's leading dementia research charity, is driven and fascinated by ideas that can make a difference, and has major public campaigns to change public perceptions of dementia and to break down the stigma around these diseases. So before we get started, there's a couple of things I'd like to let you know. We'd really like, despite you not being here as a live audience, to participate in the event. So we have a Slido board. You want to go to slido.com and enter the code 328888. There should be a little message on your screen at the moment, which is going to tell you how you can get there. And we'd welcome your questions. And I've got the iPad here in front of me. We can pick those questions up to the panel and really provoke that throughout. I'll do a couple of nudges in the middle. And then finally, as architects, we thought we wanted to capture this evening's events and conversation in a creative and artistic way. So over in our corner, we have a couple of our rising stars from Hawkins Brown. So we've got Alex, June and Dev. They're making a graphic record of the event this evening, and what we'll do in due course is circulate some of that via our social media, and it will really capture the event in a graphic manner. So, without further ado, let's get stuck in. I think I'm going to come to you, Marion, first as the question. So given the synergies of where we are right now, we're in the Foundling Hospital, probably the first children's hospital. You're a director of a children's hospital. I'd like to know what the word care means to you in your setting, how that resonates with you and your team and what you do.
So thank you. So for me, and I think for us, care is about responding to our sort of shared human vulnerability in its particular individual manifestations, responding to the need of each and every child and family according to their particular circumstances, their particular wishes. How do we look after them as we would want our children and our families to be looked after? That ultimately is what gets us out of bed in the morning, really.
Brilliant. And do you think, how do you think the environment that care is delivered affects and influences the level of care given to patients?
Oh, I think it's huge. You can see families relax as they walk through the door of a carefully thought through facility. How welcoming it is, how unthreatening, how it can capture the interest or distract the child, reassure the parents in terms of the sort of sense of having the expertise around them.
So that support network really helps kind of develop the ability to get better, the clinical improvement.
Exactly, and if they feel relaxed, their chances of rapid recovery are, and their ability to listen and to interact with the staff and explain what they need are hugely advanced. I think the other really important thing is how the environment looks after our staff, because if our staff feel that they are cared for and looked after, their ability then to care,
so they can give a better level of
with
care
their full selves to the families is very much affected.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
Okay, that's great. So, Rachel, you're at the other end of life. So we've got the good beginnings and the sort of solid foundations. You're looking after people who are living out the latter stages of life in as good a way as possible. Do you think that there's a difference in the need for the environment? Do you think the environment at the end of life needs to be, I don't know, subdued or dulled down, or is it more vibrant? Is it something that needs to be?
I think it's a really interesting question, because I think in general in health services, including the NHS, it's really striking that I would argue the only two areas where environment and how much an environment speaks to how much we are trying to care for our patients and their families is at the extremes of life. It's the cradle bit and the grave bit. Paediatrics wards routinely have glorious colour and vision and just beautiful creative ways to help children feel safe, stimulated and so on. And similarly, I work in an NHS hospice, and it was a defining feature of our hospice when it was built a few decades ago that everything, the bricks and mortar, the windows, the gardens, should be part of the care that we were providing patients. And that's especially important in palliative medicine, because if you come into a hospice, there probably isn't a single building in the world that is more steeped in fear and taboo and darkness than a hospice. Lots of patients think that they are coming here to my workplace to die, and that nothing they will experience could ever be joyful or beautiful again. And what often happens is, much as Marion's just described, they will arrive and suddenly you can almost see the stress and fear melting away when they discover that actually they've entered an environment where every single detail, as much as we humanly can, speaks to care and that they matter and that they're important to us. And it doesn't matter if they only have weeks or days or maybe hours to live, they're still a human being.
So it's a breaking down that institutionalisation, making it feel much more homely, somewhere that you can be yourself.
Exactly. And I think an environment, if you have beautiful skylights so the light floods in and gorgeous gardens so patients can fling open the doors and hear the bird song, or art on the walls, or lovely duvets, not kind of sterile NHS sheets. Yep. These are all ways not just of providing physical comfort, they're ways of saying to a patient, communicating to them we've thought about you, we're thinking about your experience of this place of care, and we're trying to make it as lovely as it can be for you. And that's a way of communicating care.
So, Rama, I'm going to draw you in here because you're the designer amongst the panel alongside myself. So I've heard you talk before, and I've heard you think about talk about people and listening to people. I just wondered what your viewpoint was there in terms of what Rachel was saying about kind of making people feel that they are being listened to and that their needs are being fulfilled. How does that play in your world?
So I thought you might bring me in next. I have this feeling. And I think design is everywhere. It's all around us, and the decisions that designers make can make or break a person. And listening to what both of you were saying, it kind of makes me want to visit. It's got that element of joy, of that attraction to it, even from womb to tomb. And your first question about what is care, it really answers that, because the word that came into my mind was empathy. So with design, empathy is one of the most powerful tools that we have, and it's not something that's unequal. It's something that's hand in hand. It's compassionate, it's kind, it's joyful. Empathy at the end of the day is love. And I think that's what designers hold in their hands and we hold in our hearts. You can make or break a human spirit. So I think I'd elevate design to its most powerful and conscious state by saying, care is empathy and empathy is love.
And that's got connotations of making things better, just a general improvement, no matter how bad the scenario might be, no matter what bad news you've been given. I guess, Hilary, the research is kind of at the heart of this, right? So how can we improve things? And you look after an organisation that's grown hugely since its inception. It's become a real sort of media presence in the last couple of weeks, given the recent announcements. How does care overlay in the world of research? I mean, people in white coats looking at test tubes, do they care about what's going on in hospitals and what's happening in places where palliative care is being provided? Or is it just a big thing underneath a pharma company's label? What's your take on how that works?
So for us, everything that we're doing in my charity is about people, and it's about people with dementia. So we fund research to try and find treatments for people with dementia and try and understand more of the diseases that cause dementia. And I think care has to be all around. And I think that, I guess for me, there are sort of two strands, and my career now is very focused on medical research and science. But I worked previously for Age UK and Age Concern, and so my big focus there was more broad around sort of social care and ageing societies. And I think the two go hand in hand, because we will develop treatments for people with dementia, and the first potential treatment has just been licensed in the United States in the last couple of weeks, which you referred to. But as we start to be able to maybe treat some of these diseases, we will still need to support and care in the community of people with dementia. So the vast majority of people in dementia are living in their own homes. They are still active in society and need to be supported to do so. And some actually quite small changes in terms of design in homes or public spaces can make a huge difference in people with dementia, but also older people, and the proportion of older people in society is growing massively. We have an ageing society. How do we make sure that design delivers for them so that they can continue to play active roles in the community and are supported to be able to do so? I think from a scientific perspective, one of the really interesting things in the area that we've worked in, obviously we've seen a growth in terms of the number of scientists working in dementia and a real kind of buzz and excitement, I think, around dementia that we've maybe not seen in this space. And actually a lot of that's to do with collaboration, and have seen a real boost, particularly in the UK, of interesting ways of working. So for us, putting drug discovery institutes within universities or within clinical settings and bringing scientists much closer to patients actually helps kind of overlap that in terms of really an understanding of who we're here to deliver with when we talk about
so there's that
science.
appreciation of I'm trying to do something, you're trying to do something, but actually there's some grey area in the middle where we can do better together and combine. Excellent. So I think, I mean, that's a broad conversation topic about all design. I mean, we're the designers in the room are we've got some guys scribbling in the corner that are working together. They're producing something, and hopefully that will become better than if one of them did it on their own. And there's that team ethic thing about care, looking after, Marion, you mentioned the kind of staff well-being. And then, Tim, we were talking at the beginning outside about kind of, you're a surgeon, that's just a technical box in a hospital, but you were talking to me about the ability to work in nice spaces helps you deliver a better level of care. So just talk to me a little bit about that. What is it that surgeons need and want? What is it that makes a good space for you guys doing your work?
Well, it's a complicated mix, isn't it? Because we're a group of clinicians and the whole care team where we hope that care and is woven into our DNA almost. It's what we're about, and we all know when somebody who's a carer hasn't got that in their DNA, and that empathy that Rana talked so well about is when that's missing. So that's part of what we are. But we've got a group of our patients in secondary care, hospital care for want of another word, they're often frightened. They're coming at crisis moments of their life. They don't know what's going on. So there's this mix of people who need to care and need to work and need their space, and they need an environment that's conducive to doing their best work. But they also are there's this box that's got to go on with all the tech stuff inside. And as a surgeon, I've always valued places where I can, some operations go on 6, 8, 10 hours. And when I can walk out in a break, throw open the windows and see the world, and the humanity can come in. And when I've worked abroad, in many hospitals in the developing world, or in less privileged parts of the world, they've got balconies where people can go out and just go for a stroll. And I mean, a lot of people smoke still in other parts of the world, but they can go out and have a smoke and relax themselves and get their humanity back. And I think if we have buildings that are deep boxes, which just high-tech environments, that doesn't meet that need. So there is this need to look after the carers, to give a caring environment, but also to have a soothing and a conducive environment for those who are frightened and in those crisis moments of their life, which is what so much hospital care is about.
So it's important to look after yourself as much as it is to be able to give others care, because if you're not looking after yourself, then you can't give that level of care to others that will help them improve. And I guess
absolutely,
that's probably very pertinent given the last 18 months. And I mean, Rachel, I'm looking at you. You've just published a book about the inside of the first pandemic, and I wondered whether or not there's some lessons that we can take away. What can we do as designers, as creative industry, as people that work in both healthcare, in workplace, education settings? What can we do to improve the level of care that can be provided to the people that work in these environments?
Well, it's fascinating, really. In a way, I think the last 18 months has been a sort of country health service-wide experiment in what the NHS looks like when you put brutal barriers between individuals, caregivers and patients and their families, and actually family members themselves. So that the two ways in which our working environment in health changed fundamentally were, first of all, our PPE. We were covered in masks and gowns and visors, at least, possibly more PPE than that. And then secondly, visitors, not entirely, but the vast majority of visitors were excluded from hospitals. And of course, that was all for very obvious reasons. We needed to protect everybody from getting infected with this terrible virus. However, it stripped away so much of the humanity of our hospitals that I think we all probably to some extent took for granted. And I know that very early on, I had this awful realization that for the patients I was seeing, and I was working on acute COVID ward with patients who were just dying in the same way, from the same illness over and over again, I realized that from the perspective of one of those patients, from the moment they came inside the hospital, they were destined literally never to see an unmasked human face again for as long as they lived, because everybody, all of us, and anybody who was able to visit wore a mask. So you would never see a human smile again in your life. And I think we all realised that and frantically did everything in our power to try to drag back in the humanity and the love that we so easily had been able to display prior to COVID to our patients through tactility, through touch, through holding someone, letting them cry on your shoulder, holding their hand. So much of that was taken away. And we had to work to bring it in through technology, through tablets, through smartphones, through family members sending us favourite songs or letters, poems that we would read at the bedside. And I think all of that process, which was so traumatic, taught us, firstly, that all those simple ways in which human beings connect, are present with each other, are able to be tactile and loving towards each other, is a profoundly important part of a healthcare environment. And also, if it's taken away, then it deeply, deeply wounds staff. If you are a caring professional and somehow you're unable to care in the way you want to, that's brutalising for you. And I know I suffered terribly from that during the pandemic. And there's a really profound lesson there for the well-being of everybody in a healthcare environment. It's that you have to build environments somehow, you just have to, that are caring for patients, because if you don't, then the staff will wilt and die because they suffer too, because they're not able to do their fundamental task, which is
so the hospitality, the looking after, yes, the making spaces welcoming, friendly, loving, homely, all those sort of soft, gooey adjectives that aren't really clinical. They're not. Yes. They're not proven. They're not tested in a laboratory, but they help and they make people, yes, feel better. That is at the crux of what care is. And I guess, Rama, there's a question that I've got here, which is you look at lots of future thinking and forward thinking about design, and we've all been threatening to do kind of telehealth and remote desktop learning, and we're all forced into this sort of scenario where we're all suddenly accustomed to cameras and Zoom and all that stuff. Do you think there's a place for technology and wearables and all this data collection that might just worryingly take away that care element? Or is that going to be a prop? Is that going to be something that's going to make things easier? Is it going to make us all care more because we've got more stats, more data, more knowledge?
I think it's a tussle. You know, it almost feels like the opening sequence of one of the many King Kong movies where they go to Skull Island and blow everything up and it all blows up in the air and they see what lands. And, you know, they never guessed it was King Kong. But it almost feels like what was supposed to happen in 10 years happened in, 10 days. And we're still in the aftermath of that. Technology is a fantastic enabler. It's a fantastic barrier. It's a great tool, but it can also be a great weapon. I think, what you're saying is absolutely right. The technology is only enabling human interaction and at another level, in another way. But whilst you were speaking, whilst all of you were speaking, I was thinking, what does health actually mean? And that's a key question, whether it comes through the voice of a person in front of you or through a recorded voice or through the end of a phone. And, health is so much more than a pill, a medication, or a diagnosis. All of those things are important, but it's, I'm reminded of 6 years ago, I ended up in a hospital and they didn't quite know what was wrong with me. The first doctor said to me, your life is over. We've got to run tests. It'll never be the same again. So I had this night in a room where someone actually died in A&E. And then the second doctor came in the morning and he said to me, I see you're a designer, show me some of your designs. So he spent 15, 20 minutes talking to me and he said, don't accept your diagnosis. He said, the world needs you. We need you out there designing ambulances, care home furniture, tools to create gender and racial equality. And that was that was health. That was better than the 59 cocktails. You know, the cocktail of drugs was important. That was the technology, and I welcome that. But the other thing made me shift 180 degrees into a space of humanity. So love technology, love diagnosis, love medication, but it's all part of human choice and human life.
Okay, so there's a couple of avenues I'd like to take here. Marion, I'm going to look at you first, because I think you mentioned it before, kind of the family support bubble around children. Like, children aren't necessarily able to communicate where it hurts, what it is that's causing the problem, because, I mean, let's face it, they've not been around long enough to know sometimes whether it's right, wrong, indifferent. Some of your patients presumably start life with embedded issues and troubles that they have to deal with. Do you think that the technologies, the support systems and positivity in a caring way helps at a sort of subconscious level, and children feed off that in the same way Rama kind of rallied, being told, we need you, kind of keep your chin up, here's a load of drugs, but keep going. Do you think that's palpable? Is that something that is part of a caring environment?
So I think it's essentially what everyone's been saying. It's a good servant, but mustn't be the master. I think health means different things for different people, doesn't it? And it's about working out what it means for this particular person. I think for kids, I mean, they take the digital applications as just how life is now, but actually that's not what brings them the joy. The joy and the reassurance come from the cuddles from their parents, the familiar nurse, the familiar doctor who's so thrilled to see them when they walk through the door for their regular checkout. That's why they love coming to the hospital, or actually to go on the slide in our outpatients area. That the technology is just like the kind of the fact that the lights work and water comes out of the taps.
Yeah. So you've touched on an interesting point there, and I guess I'll take this slightly more broadly, and I'll welcome anybody's view on this really, which is that the last 2 years we've all been kind of transfixed on these things, was scrolling endlessly, finding other people's lives through a window of whatever. Is that good for us? Is that mentally? What the question I've got here is, can we outsource care? Can those connections via kind of tablets and devices, can they replace that human interaction that you said? I mean, you spoke about it quite clearly, Rachel, but I wondered what others thought about that. Tim, you're smiling.
Well, categorically no. Absolutely. There's something, you talk about what health is, and picking up health, something that's unhealthy, is exceptionally difficult in 2 dimensions. We need to have human interaction. I think many clinicians have spoken very eloquently about these immeasurable things which come across in human interaction, where we can pick up whether somebody is not interacting well, and whether, in my world of children's surgery, whether a family are not interacting well with their child, and the child's not responding well. You can sense it, yeah, and an experienced clinician picks that up, and you can't put numbers on this sort of thing, no. But and in fact, for something like, in my world of a cleft lip surgery, 2 children can have the same outcome, same physical outcome, but completely different health as a consequence, because of some of these immeasurables.
So in your world, the aesthetics of the kind of reconstructive surgery is more about actually the mental well-being or the person's self-well-being than necessarily what it actually looks like.
It is. I mean, that's not to say that we aren't perfectionists by nature. So the tech side of what we do, whether that be tech, craft tech, to get the cuts right in the right place and the measurements right and so forth, and we're all striving to do that all the time. But that's just a small part of the equation. And what really matters is the whole package, that holistic care from prenatal diagnosis, in my case, to how somebody is going to be at 100 living with the same scars or same consequences. So we want to walk with them through that journey, and I'm sure all of us in our care worlds are walking a walk, and that's part of being a good carer. So the environment in which we do that, that's why it really matters. And we need to be healthy carers to be able to transmit that. So it's going back to sort of my original.
Yeah, so that kind of, I guess the piece that I'm taking away there is that the environment is important, the process of giving care is important, both for the person receiving and for the person giving, in a sense of well-being and making you guys feel good. And I guess I'm going to question kind of all of you, is like, how has the last 18 months been for everybody? I mean, there's a question about self-care here. Like you're all doing magnificent things in your careers. You're all looking after people. You're all providing care. I kind of wondered, do any of you have any rituals or spaces or places that you go to for your own well-being? What is it that people that do caring for a living do for themselves? I mean, Rachel, is it writing? Is that your self-care, or is that more part of the professional piece? I don't know.
Well, I think I did have a ritual through a lot of the pandemic, which was a sort of very necessary physical ritual of decontamination. Every time I came home from the hospital, I'd already got out of my COVID-covered scrubs. But then when I got home, I had this obsessive ritual. The kids weren't allowed near me. I had to wipe down my phone, the door handle, the car keys, and then I'd strip off, have a shower, wash all the COVID out of my hair. And that was definitely it was a symbolic cleansing as well. It was a kind of way of putting
leaving
that
all
world
that somewhere
on one
else.
side,
Yeah.
and sort of trying to re-engage with being just a normal kind
Mum
of
at home.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to persuade the kids to do their homeschooling. But I think more generally, I think I find in a peculiar way the act of caring for others, being part of a team caring for others, it is emotionally grueling sometimes, it's hard sometimes, but it's also simultaneously an absolute privilege. And for the last 18 months, I wasn't locked down. I was going to work every day and honestly seeing the absolute best of human nature in terms of colleagues, patients themselves, family members. Everybody was scared, but was being so brave and so just compassionate and selfless and tough, tenacious in trying to do a good job for people who were really vulnerable. And I found that was the way I cared for myself. I would come away and I would think about that and sometimes write about it, because I knew I was witnessing something that was true and good about people, despite all of the things that are bad in the world. Yep, and there's a lot of that too. But I saw that and it was real. And when I feel low or a bit overwhelmed, I try to hang on to that because I know that's true.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, others, come on, who else has got some rituals that makes themselves feel a bit better, a bit of self-care? You're smiling, Marion. What's your ritual?
I have it's a build on Tim's throw open the window. We're very lucky where our hospital is. It's just opposite a park, and just going for a walk around the park, having your meeting, walking around.
Bit of space, bit of open air.
A bit of open air, a bit of just normal two people. I was listening to what Rachel was saying and remembering that one of the things that struck me in that kind of in those very intense periods was we remembered to ask each other, are you all right? Mm-hmm. And actually, we don't do that enough, do we? And then all of a sudden we realise that this is really important. And one of the things that we learned very rapidly was the importance of keeping teams of staff together, not splitting them up and sending some to one ward and another to another ward, keeping people in there with people that they were used to working with, who knew a little bit more about them as human beings.
Social network being the glue that sticks them together.
So important, and how much easier it then became for people.
So Hilary, your organisation recently were kind of rewarded for being a good employer. So you're not only a charitable endeavour and you're promoting greatness in the world by doing good stuff with dementia and clinicians and scientists, but you're also somehow managing to do it amongst your own organisation. How important is care within a large charitable organisation? Is it the bedrock? Is it what creates the social glue? Is that how your teams thrive together?
I think it is, and I think we often talk about the sort of culture within our organisation, like lots of organisations do. We're really clear about who we are and the purpose of our organisation. I think the last couple of years have been really tough for people working in dementia for a number of reasons. Obviously, we've seen the impact of COVID and the number of people with dementia who've lost their lives, people in care homes who've been in a dreadful situation. But I think as a scientific funder, we've also had to pause some of our grant rounds because our fundraising has been down. So we've had to make some really tough decisions within the organisation. And so it's been really important that we stick together as a team, and that, you know, that's a team of 200 odd people, and support each other and look after each other, and I think that's really, really come through. So actually, in terms of our employees' kind of interactions with each other and support for each other, I think people just have stepped up, and they've stepped up to support the charity and protect the organisation and support the people that we're there for. And I think that's probably helped us ride the last year or two that have been tough for, you know, we're an organisation that solely relies on public fundraising, which obviously has been a really tough environment to work in. So I think that, yeah, there's the sort of special quality there.
So there's the care for the organisation, that's endemic in it. And I guess, Rama, you work with companies, big industry, people that are outside of design, and can you design that sort of structure? Is that, or is it just natural? Is that a human thing? Is it? I mean, I don't, like, you all work in teams. That's a question for everybody, I guess. How do you bring people together in such a successful way? And is it replicable? Can you get care in the workplace?
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to that one word of empathy, but also mixed with clarity. So you need those two things working together. So there's really two things I wanted to say. One is a 3-word phrase that has been transformational on that front, you know, which, you know, if you think about what are the most important words in the English language, and if you believe Hollywood or Bollywood, it's "I love you." And I think, you know, "I love you too" is also important, because if you say it and no one says it back, it's a little embarrassing. But the words that really came out, and it really riffs on what you're saying, is the words "I see you." So however that represents in itself, it's, you know, thank you for working late. Thank you for making this meeting on time, even though you have 4 children. Thank you for making this meeting on time, even though you live by yourself and, you know, may not be that motivated. And trying to see people and for them to see you has just been an absolutely incredible exercise in empathy through Zoom. You know, and in some ways your radar has to go up. And I think the other thing of, you know, you're not required to set yourself on fire in order to keep other people warm. That's another aspect of care. So the other side of that for oneself is to look after yourself. And that for me has been, you know, again, another one word is yoga. It's been absolutely incredible, because it's a journey out and a journey in. And you know, I've never loved my home so much, my neighbours. We had a street party for VE Day. And there were all these other affordances. You know, we lost my dad just before COVID. There was lots of challenges, friends, family, you know, like the rest of the world. But that empathy mixed with clarity brought something of resilience in. And those words of "I see you," and looking at each person in your friend circle, family circle, and at work, your work family, just incredibly important to even just sit down and reflect. What is that person going through, or what may they need to hear? So I'm not advocating walking around, you know, like in Teletubby Land or something, you know, thanking everyone and dancing around. But actually, it's just a simple thing of sometimes I'm here with you.
I really like the way that ICU is also intensive care unit. There's
Yes.
there's a lovely little riff there, and I think that's the community piece is really interesting here. And I guess we as architects work in all sorts of facets to balance the sort of judgments required, whether that's aesthetics, whether it's technical requirements, whether it's spatial performance or regulation. And I guess we're talking to a room. Well, not a room, a virtual room of designers and sort of creative enthusiasts who some of them have a duty of care by their professional appointments. We're registered and chartered. I want to ask all of you really, what can you say to designers about care and about how to stitch care into communities? Because not everybody works on hospitals or in hospices or in the healthcare sphere. There's people out there that are designing houses that are commercial developments, but they need care. They need to be done with love. They need to be designed for people. There's schools, there's hospitals, there's museums. All of you have experience of buildings, you have experience of organisations, and I just kind of wondered whether or not we could just do a quick around discussion about if you could speak to this audience and give them some suggestions, some ideas. What would it be? Tim, you've travelled the world. You've seen a lot of different places.
Well, what's resonating with me is the need for communal space, and so much of what's happened it's over my career has actually been the loss of the ability to create communities. So we've had some structural things like the introduction of the shift systems in healthcare and the destruction of small groups who work together. We used to call them firms in medicine, surgical firms and medical firms. When you were looked at, and there was a if you weren't there or if you were having a bad day, somebody noticed, even if you were there was a bully in the team or whatever, but you sort of supported each other, and a lot of that's gone. Along with that, as within design, we brought in open plan offices for our admin spaces, but then broke up what was actually the most important space, which was the junior doctors' mess, the place where they'd kind of congregate together. The theatre coffee room is a place of immense importance in surgery, where things get shuffled around. It's a bit like collegiality, isn't it? In when you mix everybody up, everybody has. The guard goes down, and if you've had a rotten operation or something's gone wrong, some people can put an arm around you, or you can celebrate. And you have those are the places, and you need space to do that.
So the surgeon's street party, to use Rama's example,
yeah, absolutely.
Come together, support one another.
And that's really, really important, and it does happen, but it's easy to destroy it because you can't measure it, and you can't factor it in, and there's no budget for it.
Make sure that glue is there.
Make sure that glue is there.
And you're nodding vigorously, Rachel.
Yeah, over to Rachel.
I agree with absolutely everything Tim says, and would just add that an appeal, really. So in the same way that I appeal to medical students, to junior doctors, I encourage them to try and make an imaginative leap into what it's actually like for a patient. Try to imagine what it's like from their point of view. Well, the same is true if you're designing a building. If you're creating a hospital, try to walk into the building that you're imagining or be wheeled into it on a stretcher as though you are a patient and think, what is it going to look like if the first thing I see is horrific fluorescent strip lights streaming on the ceiling above me? You might not be able to avoid strip lights, but maybe there's a way of making them slightly less painful.
A different perspective.
Yeah. Figure out how to have all of the bins that you need for all the paper towels and so on, but not in such a way that literally every 10 seconds all night long, they smash down metal on metal so that every patient doesn't sleep at night. So just force yourself, make yourself a patient and imagine, go on that journey with the patient and ask yourself at every step, if I'm in this position, what is it like for me? Because that's the secret, attentiveness to the patient's point of view, because then you'll figure out the problems and the hard edges that are so easy sometimes to mollify and fix if you only notice them in the first place. So, yeah.
So guys, over to this side of the table, we've done a very linear progression. Let's start with Hilary. How does your world think about it? What would you say to designers?
So there's a kind of lots of avenues you could go here. I mean, I think that it has to be from the person's perspective, and I think that there's more and more understanding now of how someone's environment can impact on them if they're living with dementia. And it can be maybe small things in terms of design of the flooring. So actually having different coloured flooring, or suddenly a kind of a dark bar in the flooring that may look good for a designer or break up areas of the floor. Actually, someone with dementia may think that that's essentially a hole in the floor, or suddenly something that they've got to kind of navigate around, and will then have fear of potentially going into that setting. And that could be a supermarket, that could be a library. And so I think just having an understanding as to what the world can be like if you're living with that particular condition, or if you're an older person who maybe then has some other particular needs, I think is really, really key. And I think that some of those small changes can make a massive difference. I think the wider point around kind of community and bringing people together, actually, if you then look back at, there are certain things that we know we can do to reduce our risk of dementia, and actually one of those things is the ability to socially interact and to take part in exercise through midlife. But actually far too many older people don't have the ability to interact with others, and that we know that there are, I think Age UK did some recent research saying there's 1 million older people who haven't spoken to another person in over a month, and this was pre-pandemic. So goodness knows what that is now. And actually their main company is the TV or is the radio. And so actually how are you designing spaces when you might be designing an office block or a block of expensive flats? Actually, how are you then providing space for the local community and people that live there to come together? And that could be, in really nice outside space, but just other different spaces that will work for people with dementia, or they'll work people with disability or with young children. And actually, if you can generally get it right for a few of those groups, it'll be brilliant for everyone.
Yeah, so think more multi-generational rather than specifics.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose that's got some nice parity with bringing patients and clinicians and researchers all together.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be about consultation and designing with those people in mind, but actually, bring someone with dementia to the table when you're talking about early designs. Actually talk to them about what the world looks and feels like to them, and actually what would make the difference. And there's been some fantastic research that's taken place, and there's actually a village in the Netherlands, a small dementia village that's been created. And they have shops and pubs and cafes, and they all live in clusters of housing depending on their kind of sort of cultural backgrounds or their stage of their dementia. And they have absolute freedom to live and to go about their lives as they normally would. There is some care and sort of health facilities there on site, but it's a small dementia village. And the outcomes for those people with dementia are incredible. So actually they're living longer without the kind of sort of comorbidities that often people with dementia often need. They haven't necessarily got the needs for some sort of medication. They're often, a lot of people with dementia become incontinent relatively early on. Actually, they don't then have that. Their confidence is there. They can interact with people. And so there's some really interesting projects. So I think talking to some of the voluntary organisations and talking to some of the patient groups is probably a really good place to start.
So in that instance, design is actually preventing a need for medical intervention longer term, because actually a better environment is helping them live a better life.
Longer, healthier life.
Longer, healthier life. Marion, we're going to have to talk about your environment at work. It's a festival of colour. There's slides, there's rocket lifts. It's got to be one of your favourite buildings, hasn't it?
It definitely has, but I think that the notion of having huddle space, so we have a beautiful, beautiful atrium with all the daylight coming through, so the families can go and sit in it and look out on the trees, but know that they are not having to move too far away from their child's bedside. But in there, creating smaller, more intimate spaces for people who want to just go and sit, whether that's staff or patients, just be private and be alone. Really, really important. I think the other thing, we also work out in the community, and how spaces work for children and young people is so important, and how do you design that in a way that's going to, I should ask you really, shouldn't I, that's going to build a sense of self-esteem in children and young people. My dad was a teacher, and I remember him always saying the way to assess a school wasn't just about the exam results and all the kind of beautiful art displays. It was go have a look at the toilets. But there's something there. What signal are you sending to the kids about them and their importance? Give them some fun, quirky toilets that are absolutely spick and span.
I'm not sure the NHS in general succeeds on that criterion, if I'm totally honest.
So number one, we should try and improve the toilets in the NHS. That's an excellent sort of takeaway. So I've got a couple of questions that have come through. I'm gonna throw these out to the whole panel. So let me know what you think. So we've got Helena. What is your favourite building or space that designers of healthcare environments should be looking at, and why? So we've talked about the Evelina, so that's one we can go and look at. How about Tim? Where's your favourite healthcare building that architects, designers should go and look at?
A children's charity in Beijing for a craniofacial centre called the Smile Angel Centre. It's just the most remarkably thought through, and it's high tech, but it's got music therapy rooms, and fantastic. Charitably funded in Beijing. It was jaw-dropping.
Brilliant, there we go. We'll go and have a look at that. How about you, Rachel?
The Royal Children's Orthopaedic Hospital in Greater London, which a new building was built there a couple of years ago, and they worked with Robert Macfarlane and Jackie Morris, who are the author and artist who created the beautiful book The Lost Words, which is about common nature words that have been lost through lack of use from the Oxford Children's English Dictionary. And each word is something like a kingfisher or an otter. And Rob wrote a poem about these natural creatures or trees or flowers, and Jackie illustrated them. And as you go through the building, the walls are just a frieze of poems and art. So they're huge murals on all of the walls. And there are little tiny mice and creatures hidden on all of the walls for the children to find whether they're that high or that high. And it's just dazzling.
So some poetry, beautiful. Some artwork, some culture, and a bit of a game.
Yeah.
And we haven't even thought about any treatment space or clinical environment. Rama, how about you? You're going to come up with something left field here, surely.
I was going to say my back garden, but
that's fine. We'll send everybody round.
There's room for you all. No, there's two healthcare classified spaces that I remember. Well, there's sort of three, so I'll go through them very quickly. One was St. Olav's in Trondheim. So St. Olav's Hospital, 15-year redesign of a hospital space. What they actually did is they mixed up the clinicians, the architects, and the community in one room to design this space, so they couldn't escape each other, especially in the huddle spaces. And what they created is a space that people go to hang out in. The Wi-Fi is great, so students go and hang out there. They've got a wheelchair adventure course for people to rehabilitate, and everyone uses it, and it's a shortcut through the city. And I just love that final bit, that it's a shortcut. The second one is Maggie's. So the Maggie Care Centres, and especially the one in Hong Kong. So, Hong Kong is full of some fairly brutalist architecture, and if you can, when you might get the news that you have, you have a diagnosis that changes your life, you're in a very clinical setting, and Maggie's just brings that down to the domestic scale. It's just a little house-sized building outside of the hospital that you can go to recuperate. And the final place, if you look at health as part of life, was actually in Finland, where it was a collective, it was a communal collective of older people who realized we don't want to retire into a space that currently exists, but we are retired architects, doctors, lawyers, nurses, police people. we can design our own and create it. So they got a bit of land from the government, and they created this set of residential apartments where you move from kind of agile to fragile, and those who are more agile are expected to pay it forward, and when it's your turn, it's paid back to you. But the interesting thing is they had a restaurant which you were expected to do your stint in. They had this sort of pseudo-grandparenting room for kids of the local area who would come home from school early, but the parents would come home later. So there was this kind of pseudo-grandparenting service, and it sounds a lot like, the dementia village you're talking about. Cafe, haircut, all of those things they designed in.
Yeah, I was just going to draw the same, but would your village in the Netherlands be your recommendation, or is there somewhere else?
It probably would. I think in terms of dementia care, I don't think I've seen a better approach. And I think that there's some fantastic care homes in the UK doing a brilliant job on the resources that they've got. But I think that the really good ones are those that are supporting people to live their lives. So they're not just going there to just be looked after. They feel part of a home. And I think, particularly the place in the Netherlands, the way that they supported people to live was that they essentially gave that care and support, but the individuals that lived there had their independence. So instead of being in a care setting where they were served lunch on a tray, they were involved from 10 o'clock in the morning in preparing their lunch. So actually people with relatively advanced dementia might still be able to peel a carrot. So they could peel the carrots, or they could help do some of their laundry. So they were involved in all the things that you would normally do in life, and actually that took up most of their then days. And so they felt that they were empowered. They weren't just being cared and looked after. Yep. And therefore they didn't feel that they were sort of then part of society. Actually, they were helping run this plan. Like it's a similar kind of thesis. But I think those are the care settings, particularly for older people and people with dementia, that have by far the best health outcomes. But that has to be, I think, what we would strive for in developing care settings for older people.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've maybe got time just for one more. So this is a big one. It was almost inevitable. What does the panel think will be the lasting impact of the pandemic on our attitudes towards care? So, Rachel, we've spoken to you a bit about the impact of the pandemic on care, but how do we think we can move beyond this? What's next?
Well, I think in some ways there's been an elephant in the room during our whole discussion, which is around the fact that no matter how much many of us believe care is important, and no matter how strongly the pandemic has shown just how desperate it can be for individuals in a society when our ability to care for each other, connect with each other, be physically present with each other is radically disrupted. Nevertheless, care at the moment in modern Britain is a devalued, a profoundly undervalued part of society. Carers, if they're paid carers, they get paid the minimum wage or sub-minimum wage. There are 8.8 million unpaid carers in British society at the moment. The vast majority of carers are women. There are lots of feminist issues around caring. And all of this, I would suggest, needs to be out in the open, because I think what we've seen over the last 18 months is, on the one hand, many powerful people in society, particularly our government, our politicians, saying, NHS staff, carers, you're heroes, you're wonderful, we're going to clap you every week, every Thursday on our doorsteps. And yet still, we do not have a solution, a funding solution for how we are going to fund the care that is so desperately needed in this country to support Britain's most vulnerable members. And at the end of the day, that is the single most important index of a civilised society. I'd suggest it's how do we care for our most vulnerable.
So that glue that we've been talking about, getting everybody to work together but be fairly represented and looked after, making sure they can look after themselves so that they can offer the care to others. So.
But your question, the future needs to be, let's not just talk about how precious and valuable care is. Let's do something as a society to make sure that actually we are putting effort and resources and engagement into making Britain more caring. We have valued carers like never before in the last 18 months, but let's turn that into an enduring reality.
So maybe we need to focus in on prioritising care generally across the board, whether that's at a policy level, whether it's at a built environment level, or whether it's just in our day-to-day activities in our working environments and how we look after one another. So I think with that, we're probably out of time. So thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. This will be up on the website. As I mentioned before, we've got the graphic representation that we'll send out around the social media. Check in a week or so's time. We'll have that published for you. And in the meantime, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.